Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. A closer look at agriculture in South Carolina and conversations between the current and future leaders of the Palmetto State's largest industry. Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water is a production of the student media team at the South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Howe.
And now, here are your hosts, Dell Brockman and KC Connolly.
Welcome to this edition of Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water. My name is Dell Brockman, and my co-host today is KC Connolly. Our guest for this special Halloween season show has come from South Carolina's Department of Transportation. SCDOT is probably not the first state agency that would come to mind when you talk about Halloween, but the Department of Transportation is very familiar with all kinds of creepy crawlies, mysterious creatures, and things that go bump in the middle of the night. Here to talk about that work are biologist Keith Walker and Assistant Director of SCDOT's Environmental Services Division, and Casey's dad, Sean Connolly. Thank you for visiting with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So to begin with, like I said, environmental and natural resources is not the first thing you think about when you think of the SCDOT. So how do y'all get involved with that?
That's a great question. And if I can, I would like to just come back to that. I know y'all interviewed our Secretary of Transportation. I have got a running bet with him he might not know about. I need more views, more likes on this single one, okay? Because we are going to make it rain if it happens. But going back to that question, how does the natural resources come into play with the Department of Transportation? Well, it comes in multitude of ways. My staff, and Keith will talk a little bit about what he does, oversees from bats to all threatened endangered species. But the main thing we focus on in ours is the Clean Water Act. We have a chance when we impact streams or wetlands, we are called to offset that impact, and we offset that impact through mitigation. And so we'll talk a little more maybe about how that mitigation plays a role in ag. All that would love to discuss that. But ultimately, we restore wetlands and we restore streams to offset the impacts that our road systems have.
So you mentioned wetlands. I know historically back in the day, especially in South Carolina, we drained a lot of wetlands to make them more ag-friendly, right, a better farm in general. So how is SCDOT working with that?
No, that's a fantastic question. So a lot of times, when we're looking for areas to create this ecological uplift, if you'll allow me, that ecological uplift is best occurred on areas that used to be historic wetlands, because there's the easiest way to ensure success. Well, farmers back in the day couldn't really plant wetland habitat. So what they did is they drained it, they cut ditches through their fields. Over the course of a year or two, those ditches would drain the wetlands, and it would be now ag-friendly, if you will. And that has been a successful model for years, decades. Now what's happening is farmers are now realizing there is money, there is an ecological benefit, if you will, going back to that historic wetland habitat. And we, the Department of Transportation, can help facilitate that through mitigation, as we call it. A lot of the mitigation in South Carolina is ag fields that have been ditched. And what they do is they now plug those ditches so that hydrology restores over time and it becomes a wetland habitat again. And that ecological uplift from a farm field to a wetland creates credits. And that farmer can sell those credits to folks at a premium and generate income outside of just the ag use.
Now, you sat there and said a lot of big words. So,
I agree.
Back at home, I'm obviously, as my dad, back at home, I hear mitigation thrown around all the time. Could you explain kind of what that is and what that process is?
That's a good question, too. So mitigation is a sequence where we have to, as a transportation agency, avoid wetlands, minimize impacts. If we can't avoid them, then we have to minimize the impacts. And if we can't minimize the impacts, we have to compensate. So mitigation is compensation, if you will, for unavoidable impacts to wetlands or streams. So that is where the farmer has that field that was been restored back to a wetland that generates a certain amount of credits, if you will, and those credits are then sold to the DOT to help offset or compensate, if you will, our impacts to roads from roads.
So you're in charge, or from what I understand, you are part head of all these environmental services that fall under the broad category at DOT. What are some of the different things y'all are doing right now to help with what you just said, all those big words, mitigation, all of that? What are some big things each of these subcategories are doing?
So let me try, and if I don't answer the question, please circle back. Because I want to make sure I get that, because it's a good question. So we we have a tool, we being the DOT, have a tool where the DOT, as Secretary Powell mentioned, we have a 10-year plan out there where we're going with our road systems. We took that, put it out there into a GIS layer where it basically forecasts our wetland impacts and our stream impacts. That level of transparency, where we are going to be in the next 10 years, and the impacts associated with that, has allowed, if you will, the ag farmers and the mitigation, if you will, bankers, to see where our impacts are going to be, and then can start that process of generating credits, restoring some of those ditched farmlands to wetlands, because they know DOT is going to be in McCormick County doing some road work, and they have a lot of impacts, and they are going to need X amount of credits. So we will have that. I think that's one of the things. That level of transparency is huge, because it allows the industry, the mitigation industry, to know where we're going and what our impacts and the size are. So that's one of the big things I would say.
Yeah, that sounds, and this is all across South Carolina, not just in Richland County, not just in Greenwood or McCormick. This is all across. This is a statewide project. That's
another thing. We have all 1,700 road projects, at least right now, running through this model, generating our impacts basically on a watershed scale. So now the public knows what the impacts are looking like and forecasted to look like. And so they can start planning to, restore wetlands, restore streams to help meet that impact need, to help compensate, if you will, those impacts.
So the past 2 weeks now, we've had y'all's name on the board, SCDOT bat problem. So I've been wondering myself, what is the problem with bats in South Carolina?
Are they just biting too many people? We got Draculas running around.
No Draculas. You're not going to turn into a vampire if you get bit by one. You might get rabies or something else, but you'll be fine. The problem with bats, if you want to call it a problem, is we have listed species. The federal government, has species that are endangered or threatened. And it's those species that would give us problems, so to speak. A lot of them, we have 15 species of bats in not Alabama, in South Carolina. I came from Alabama.
We see the hat.
War eagle. But there's 15 species of bats here in South Carolina. One of them, the northern long-eared bat, is right currently listed. They did find a gray bat last year, so that one is also listed, but that's a new one to South Carolina. And right now they're looking at listing a third one, a tricolored bat. And that one's really going to be a problem because they're everywhere.
Right.
And a lot of them are active year round. And where it gets us is when it comes to highway projects, if we have clearing to do on the side of the road, that's habitat. They roost in those trees.
Absolutely.
And so there's certain times of year that they will restrict us from clearing right now. That's during the pup season, May to end of July, and come hibernating season in the fall, November through February. It restricts our work. And another thing that it hurts us is they like our culverts and our bridges. They like the culverts better than bridges.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, if the culvert's long enough, it's like
a little cave.
It's like a cave. Temperature stays constant, and they'll get up in there and they'll get in every little crack and crevice. And it's hard to find them sometimes. But yeah, because they're federally listed, and we got to take care of those by law. That gives us a problem, and it affects our schedule, which affects everybody.
So what's y'all's plan for that? Do you like, I don't know what the term is, rehome them, I guess, somewhere else? Or do you, I don't know, hunt them? I mean, that's...
No, no. Bats aren't something like back in Alabama, gopher tortoise, so you can relocate them.
Right.
It's hard to relocate something that flies because, move it, it'll come back. And that's another thing. You don't know when he's going to be in there. He might be in there today, be gone tomorrow. He might be roosting there, hibernating there. So it's really hard to relocate these things. You just pretty much have to wait them out and work around their schedule.
So how can bats affect agriculture?
They have a big impact on agriculture. South Carolina, their pest control services saves about $120 million a year. And it's about $22 billion a year nationwide. So they eat all, the insects, the mosquitoes, which we don't like, but all your garden pests, they'll eat those. Your corn worms and other pests that eat agricultural crops.
Well, y'all both work for the DOT, and you work more environmental, and we got Batman over here. So how would, you mentioned when you're clearing for highways or on the side of the road, that's habitat for the bats, which would be more like the habitats, the forestry would be more in your category. How do y'all's jobs work together to create that environmental service?
That's a good question. But they are closely tied together. Can't have one without the other. They can't build the roads unless we go through all the procedures, which Fish and Wildlife Service take care of the bats. So once you start getting into bats, they do like the trees and the wetlands. So you get a kind of a double dose right there. Right. You got to deal with the fish and wildlife, you got to deal with the Corps.
Yeah, and I think that's a good question. I think my staff is very, very flexible, and they wear multiple hats. They'll wear the biological, go out there in the woods and do threatened endangered species surveys. They'll do habitat surveys. Then they'll put on their wetland hat, and they'll go out and delineate a wetland boundary. They'll go out there and check ordinary high water marks. They'll do that. Then they, some of the folks deal with cultural. Some of the folks deal with noise. So there's a variety of different hats that they're asked to wear. So that's a great question, because though I see it as, we got environmental and then we got biology. How do they work together? I would say it's all under the one umbrella of environmental. And in order for us to get permits from the federal government, which is required by law, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, we have to go get these permits from the Corps of Engineers. It requires a diverse group that has skill sets from biology, GIS, to wetland delineation, botany. All those skill sets come together. I know the tracks that y'all have here at this school would feed in very well into where our environmental services are. Yeah. So that.
Speaking of, me and Dell and both of our pathways are ENR, and we share the same ENR in the workplace class. Dell, to me, this sounds exactly like what we're doing in class.
Oh, absolutely. We're always doing something different, though, like you said. But, it's always great to meet new people around here, because you never know. I've never talked to somebody from the ENR section of DOT, so that's a new one for me. But, like you said, it's a very important thing that a lot of people don't know what goes on behind the scenes.
That's right.
So, Mr. Batman, so how did you get your start with the DOT?
This is good.
Oh, I don't know if I can go into that. I worked with Alabama DOT for 29 years, and I met the big deal over here.
Oh, God, feeding his ego.
That's what he got to. At a conference, probably we argue over that about 10 years ago. He'll say more. Yeah, see there. And it was by happenstance that we were in the same area, and we got talking and kept seeing each other every year at these conferences. And one day, finally, he's like, why don't you come work for me? I'm like, man, can you wait a few years so I can retire? Yep. And long story short, finally, the situation came up where stars aligned and the position was open, and I came to South Carolina.
Yep. How'd you end up in DOT?
Well, that's another long story. So Catherine's mom and I were just going to be in Columbia, South Carolina for 2 years. That's it. 26 years ago, we made that statement. So, but no, I came in because I had a passion like y'all do for natural resources and the environment. And it got really honed in. I used to work at DHEC doing water quality sampling and all that, and I enjoyed that portion of it. But I really got honed in with the wetlands and the stream restoration. To me, that is absolutely fascinating, that I can come in and help design a stream, help restore this habitat to a pristine wetland is fascinating. And so when this position opened at the South Carolina Department of Transportation, I came in as a biologist, went up to a permit manager, and now all the way up to, like I said, the assistant director. So it's fantastic, great. I mean, all-stars. Every one of our team is an all-star. They wear multiple hats. And the level of conservation, Dale, that we're doing on our properties is amazing. I would argue, now DNR might push back a little bit, that we are one of the hands down, one of the largest states entities, state agencies to push forward conservation. We have, I'd probably say, over 20,000 acres in the past 5 years. We have put under conservation easement and all that, turned it over to a forestry commission, turned it over to DNR, opened it up to the public. So, and the reason we have to do that, again, is like we talked about, is at the end of the day, when we can't, we avoid, we minimize, and we have to compensate. And a lot of times that compensation is buying, an island. We bought Gunner's Island, and it's a, 6,000 acre island. We're turning that over to DNR, and they'll open that up to the public. We've got Sandy Island. That's an amazing cultural resource. It's got a historic community there. So because we can't offset all impacts, at the end of the day, we are required to do that conservation. So we move a lot of dirt. So on the other side of the coin is we do a lot of conservation, a lot of mitigation.
And you did mention conservation. So there's, if I'm not mistaken, there's conservation and there's preservation. So what would be the difference between those two?
That's such an easy question. Keith, you want to go ahead and take that one?
Conservation is wise use. To preserve something, you cannot. It's hard to preserve something that is dynamic.
Right.
It's not static. Environment's not static. Now, to conserve something, you take care of it, just like you plant your crops. You don't just keep going planting the same thing. You rotate. You're taking care of it. You're conserving your soil. Mm-hmm. Preservation is just not impact. Just leave it alone. Let nature run its course. And, sometimes, people want you to preserve something. They really don't want you to preserve it. They want it to stay the way it is, which means you have to manage it. And that's more of the conservation. Mm-hmm. Preservation is nature takes over and does what it's going to do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in South Carolina now, we have a major land crisis. I mean, since about 2002, we've lost nearly 400,000 acres of farmland. So I find it very important that SCDOT is doing their part in helping preserve some of that land for next generations. And I mean, it's just astonishing for me. So I'd like to thank y'all for that. But I mean, so what would an average day-to-day work look like for you?
I'll take the first part of that because I think it's going to be different for him. In the management role, I've got to have my hands on a variety of different projects at all time. I'm also working, on some state commerce projects as well. So just trying to help manage that. So there's a lot of meetings and a lot of that. But when I get out in the field or come out here and help the next generation of leaders, that's a win for me. Where I can talk about the greatness that is South Carolina DOT, that's a win for me. When I can get out in the field and look for state endangered species or federal endangered species, that's a win for me to get back into that. So, but a typical day, going back to your question, is it's often a lot of meetings, getting updates on stuff from staff and all that. So I can then make a decision on what trajectory do we need to do as a division? Do we need to do, okay, we got some critical projects coming forward. What are some of the risk factors, identifying those risks and how to mitigate that risk, how to lower that risk. So it's a lot of risk analysis right there as a typical day for me.
My typical day is
saving the city.
Do what?
Saving the city.
Saving the city.
When the spotlight goes on.
No. My typical day is I do a lot of permitting, reviewing jurisdictional determinations, looking at stuff that consultants have done to make sure they meet all the qualifications and have all the proper, clearances and maps in their documents before we send them off to the Corps. I also get out and I do delineation, which I love being out in the field. That's where I need to be. So I'll go out and do delineations. I'll go out and do bat surveys. Crawl through the culverts, get under the bridges and look.
He does.
But a lot of time is spent in the office in the computer. And also, there's something we call the 5%. It's the 5% is the other duties as assigned, which I seem to get a lot of.
That might be 95% of your job now.
I think since I've been here, it's been at least 85% from helping set up meetings to doing things like this, which this is fun. I like it.
Yeah.
So you did mention, being the bat expert over here, you're in the field a lot. We don't have bats inside, so hopefully.
Yeah.
So I understand that part. You're going under bridges, under the
culverts.
In the culverts, and doing that bat analysis or rehoming, rehoming those bats. But you, Dad, just because, you are my dad, I have gotten pictures of you out in the field fishing or taking a work trip fishing, and somehow that's related to your work?
All right, we're going to have to edit this part.
It's part of the job. That's not fishing rod. That's a sampling stick.
That's it.
Yeah, that's exactly vertebrates.
But you've also, part of your job recently has been, you were actually giving me a hard time about it, bringing up the beavers in our last podcast with Mr. SCDOT. But it was, that's so interesting. I remember getting a picture and hearing you talk about going out and trapping beavers. How does that even play into sitting there and typing, doing meetings, or how do you get into that part?
Yeah, so that's the fun part when I get to go out in the field. So we have a site where we did, several thousand feet of stream restoration, and it was looking great. All of a sudden, some flood come in, and it starts to degrade the system again. We just repaired, and then in comes the beavers, and they started damming up our new stream, and we've got success criteria we got to meet. And obviously, if a beaver comes in, it's not going to meet that success criteria.
Right.
So I gotta know, what is the strangest animal y'all have encountered while working for SCDOT?
Wow, that's a great question. We've got a bunch of different ones. I'll try to slow roll it so you can think there, Keith.
No,
there's no unicorns or anything like that. But I would probably say the strange. It's sort of a title. If it's strange, but it's unique. I've never seen a beaver up close, to be honest with you. And to see the teeth and the head and it was amazing. But also bats. When I think of bats, I don't think I'm as pretty. I think maybe it's the Hollywood ending, but it's the Dracula type movie. Keith, our resident bat expert, Batman himself, we had one in the DOT parking garage you were talking about, and everyone didn't know what to do. He walks up there, Batman does, the bat whisperer, grabs it, takes it, and holds it, and we got pictures, and they're the cutest freaking things I've ever seen. Oh, I was like, holy cow, that is a bat? Okay, that's awesome.
Did you touch it?
I did not touch it, no. But I'm also probably one of the only biologists out there that actually do not like snakes. Absolutely horrified of snakes. I think I put my daughter, in jeopardy to stay away from snakes. But that's another story.
I won't admit that.
Yeah, I know, that's another story.
The car to run the snake over with the tire, if I do recall.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Like I said, I hadn't been in South Carolina long.
Gopher tortoise seems unique.
Yeah, I hadn't seen one here.
What about in Alabama too? If you did field work out there.
Oh, I did not feel. Gopher tortoises are cool. They're awesome. The weirdest thing, though. Oh man, probably the Alabama waterdog. It's kind of
What
like
is that?
it's a big. It's kind of like a big salamander. It's you've heard of a hellbender, right?
Yeah.
That is similar to that. Similar to a hellbender.
A water dog.
They call it a water dog. Yeah.
Do they call it a water dog, or do
Yeah.
you call it a water dog?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
It's an Alabama water dog.
Right. Alabama is different than the other ones.
Well,
But,
I would like to thank the Mr. Sean Connolly,
The big deal himself.
and Mr. Batman over here, and my co-host Casey Conley.
Thank
And
y'all.
That'll be all for
Appreciate it.
today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carolina's Field, Forest, and Water, a closer look at agriculture in South Carolina, is a production of the student media team at the South Carolina Governor's School for Agriculture at John De La Howe. For more information on our school, visit our website at www.delahowe.sc.gov.